Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamunatira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Purudikacharya Ashtotar Shri Srimad. His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Purudikacharya Ashtotar Shri Srimad. His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavin Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Thank you, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Shyamakund Radhakund Gilovardhan Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Jai. Jagannath Swami Jai. And Srimad Bhagavad-gītā ki jai. Namavedava. Okay, so we are, forgive me, I got to turn on the heat. I tried to turn it off before 8:30, but I couldn't get before 8:30. Why is that? You have any idea? I mean, 8 o'clock would be fine, you know. Wouldn't let me. Strange, but there it is. Okay, just give me a second here. Hare Krishna. All right. Yeah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 15th day of February, 2023 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad-gītā as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 12, Devotional Service. And we are on text, is it 8? Yes, yes, text 8, on page 517. All right. Mahi eva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mahi eva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha mayeva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha mayeva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha mayeva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha. Go ahead, Ross. Mayeva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha. One more rhyme, you want to try? Mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha mayeva mana adhatsva mahi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam nasangshayaha. Mayi, upon me, eva, certainly, manaha, mind, adhatsva, fix, mayi, upon me, buddhim, intelligence, niveshaya, apply, nivasishyasi, you will live, mayi, in me, eva, certainly, ataha, urdhvam, thereafter, na, never, sangshayaha, doubt. Translation. Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always without a doubt. Purport. One who is engaged in Lord Krishna's devotional service lives in a direct relationship with the Supreme Lord. So there is no doubt that his position is transcendental from the very beginning. A devotee does not live on the material plane. He lives in Krishna. The holy name of the Lord and the Lord are non-different. Therefore, when a devotee chants Hare Krishna, Krishna and his internal potency are dancing on the tongue of the devotee. When he, the devotee, offers Krishna food, Krishna directly accepts these eatables, and the devotee becomes Krishna-ized. Krishna-ized by eating the remnants. One who does not engage in such service cannot understand how this is so, although this is a process recommended in the Bhagavad-gītā and in other Vedic literatures. Om jnana timirandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmilitam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So, this is the beginning of a series of verses in which Krishna gives direct instructions on practicing devotional service. He begins with kind of standard devotional service for someone who is very serious and is ready to take up the process of devotional service. Here is one of many verses in the Bhagavad-gītā that gives a little bit summary, very practical instruction. And this is, Krishna assures Arjuna, and assures us also, that if, and in the previous verses, two verses, he has two verses together, he kind of expands a little bit on it. Those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me and being devoted to me without deviation, engage in devotional service and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Prita, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. And then there could be a therefore here. Therefore, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always without a doubt. Now the chapter could end there, even after 8 verses. Complete lesson. Krishna has already made it very clear that the impersonal path is very difficult. Klesho adhikratastesham avyaktasakta chejasam. You can imagine, avyaktasaktam, to be attached to the invisible, that which cannot be perceived, the white light of the Brahman. Doesn't that sound like a nightmare? Kaivalyam nadakayate, there's a verse. Those who are merging into this undifferentiated Brahman is like going to hell for a devotee. So we don't want that. But Krishna still gives them, he said, even such persons, if they fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, the inconceivable, the unchanging, the fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all at last achieve me. So, if someone is, even though he's doing all those things, he's attracted, he's trying to merge into the Brahman, but he's regarding everyone equally, he's kind to all, he's doing welfare for all, he's not becoming an out-and-out demon. You can become a demon even as an impersonalist, because you don't have that personal conception that awakens compassion and all these different things. But he said they finally come to me. How? By eventually meeting a Vaishnav and becoming converted. It's rare. Lord Chaitanya was able to do it, and by the thousands. But that's how they could finally come to me. But better that you simply worship me directly like that. And so now he says, then here's this little summary verse, hey, just fix your mind upon me, you'll certainly come to me. But now he's going to be very, very liberal. He says, but if you can't take up Krishna consciousness right away full time, then you do what you can, and then you'll eventually become attracted to practice devotional service. And he goes on and on like that, even to the point of not being able to practice anything. Just try to be generous, just try to be giving, just try to, like that. Because then you see a devotee, you'll be open and receptive, and maybe you'll also get the seed of bhakti. So there's a very wonderful set of verses here. And then the chapter will close, it's a very short chapter, with 3 or 4 verses describing the qualities of pure bhakti again. It's a very wonderful chapter. So any questions on this verse, this very plain verse, fix your mind upon me, engage all intelligence in me, thus you live in me always without a doubt. Who can have a doubt? So no questions. All right, so now we go forward. Ata chittam samadhatam nashaknoshi maistiram abhyasa yogena tato mamipchaptum dhananjaya. My dear Arjuna, O winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga. In this way, develop a desire to attain me. Purport. In this verse, two different processes of Bhakti Yoga are indicated. The first applies to one who has actually developed an attachment for Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by transcendental love. And the other is for one who has not developed an attachment for the Supreme Person by transcendental love. For this second class, there are different prescribed rules and regulations one can follow to be ultimately elevated to the stage of attachment to Krishna. Bhakti Yoga is the purification of the senses. At the present moment, in material existence, the senses are always impure, being engaged in the sense gratification. But by the practice of Bhakti Yoga, these senses can become purified. And in the purified state, they come directly in contact with the Supreme Lord. In this material existence, I may be engaged in some service to some master, but I don't really lovingly serve my master. I simply serve to get some money. And the master also is not in love. He takes service from me and pays me. So there is no question of love. But for spiritual life, one must be elevated to this pure stage of love. That stage of love can be achieved by practice of devotional service performed with the present senses. This love of God is now in a dormant state in everyone's heart. And therefore, love of God is manifested in different ways, but it is contaminated by material association. Now the heart has to be purified of the material association, and that dormant natural love for Krishna has to be revived. That is the whole process. To practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, one should, under the guidance of an expert spiritual master, follow certain principles. One should rise early in the morning, take bath, enter the temple and offer prayers and chant Hare Krishna. Then collect flowers to offer to the deity, cook foodstuffs to offer to the deity, take prasadam, and so on. There are various rules and regulations which one should follow, and one should constantly hear the Bhagavad-gītā and Srimad Bhagavatam from pure devotees. This practice can help anyone rise to the level of love of God, and then he is sure of his progress into the spiritual kingdom of God. This practice of Bhakti Yoga, under the rules and regulations, with the directions of a spiritual master, will surely bring one to the stage of love of God. I think so. It sounds very familiar. Anyway, Manoram wasn't here, so we'll say a few words, unless you were online. Ever fresh. So, yes, this point of, the senses need to become purified. So what is that verse? With the present senses one cannot perceive the Lord. Do you know that one? One can understand. Oh, I forget it. But the gist is this, that with our present senses we cannot perceive the Lord directly. But, can't believe I forgot this. But beginning devotional service, beginning with the tongue, the senses will become purified and the Lord will reveal Himself. Swayam eva sparatyada. That's the last line. Swayam eva sparatyada. So the whole process is one of purification, which is very encouraging. Which it means that you just got to clean it up. Clean up the mind, the senses, intelligence, everything. It's already there. That's the whole point. The perfection is already there in us. Nitya siddha Krishna prem sadhya kapunoi shabbanadi shuddha chitte kadaye udoi. I remember quoting that verse yesterday. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, good. So, good. So, Nitya siddha Krishna prema. The eternal perfection of Krishna prema. Sadhya kapunoi is not a sadhya. In this case, sadhya means something that you don't have now, but that you're going to attain later. Now, sadhya also means the result of sadhana. So sadhana and sadhya. Really, the whole inquiry process can be summed up as, I have no idea what my real sadhya is or the sadhana. This was actually enunciated by Sanatana Goswami in his questioning Lord Chaitanya. Sadhya and sadhana. What is the ultimate goal of human life and how can I achieve it? Nobody's asking that question. They think they know. They're absorbed in the preliminary goals. I got to feed the stomach, so how can I get some money so I can buy some groceries? That's my sadhya. If I can get the money, then... but that's not your final sadhya. That's just, it enables you to keep the body and soul together. But that's not the goal in life. First of all, when I say, what is my sadhya, what is my goal, who am I? That's the first question, and that is the first question of Sanatana Goswami. Ke ami, ke nayamai tare trapachai. Who am I and why are the threefold miseries giving me so much suffering? That's the question. He said, I'm so learned in Sanskrit, people call me a great scholar, but if I don't know the answer to these questions, what's the use to my knowledge? He's modeling the way that we should also approach spiritual authority. Unless we come to that point, you're not really leading human life. Human life begins with atata brahma jigyasa. What is the absolute truth, where everything came from? And that's kind of a code for who am I and what my goal in life is. So anyway, back to our verse. So the idea is that it's already there, and by abhyasa yoga, abhyasa means a practice. In this case, the practice of bhakti yoga. Mamit chaptam danandaya. This is very significant. You will gain a desire to attain me. The whole thing, the purification is purification of desire. The senses, the mind, the intelligence are repositories of this lust, kama, material desire, at the end of the 3rd chapter. This is what impels us to do things that are against our own best interest, against our own best, meaning the soul's best interest. It may be in the body's interest, the mind's interest, but it's not in our interest. And so ultimately it leads to old age, disease, and death, another birth, and probably not human if you're living in this age. So how do we purify our desires to go back from that kama, turn that kama back into prema? Krishna says, Prabhupada explains in the purports to that section at the end of the 3rd chapter that kama is nothing but prema that has been kind of curdled by contact with the modes of nature. And it's become lust, it's become kama. The prema has become kama. And then he says it's very difficult once that happens to get it back into prema. But it is possible, even for a late beginner, he says. In other words, don't be discouraged. The process of bhakti as given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers is so powerful that anyone who takes part in it sincerely can feel the purification take place and continue. There are pitfalls and need for guidance is there along the way, but it is possible and it works. So then, abhyasa yoga. So what is that abhyas? What is that practice? Well, we have the nectar of devotion. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada, Sevanam, Archa, the 9 processes of devotion beginning with hearing. So then he said, it chopped him. You'll attain the desire to attain me. Without that desire, you can't stay for long, just on your own intellectual understanding that this is the best thing for me. You have to really get to the point of developing some attraction to Krishna, to His holy name, to everything. And that's, what is that verse? This one I remember. Krishna bhakti rasabhaditamati kriyatam hyatikatopi labhyate tat laulyam api mulyamekalam janmakoti sukatayana labhyate. Prabhupada took that first line and he created the phrase Krishna consciousness out of it. This is where it came from. Krishna bhakti rasabhavitamati. The mind, mati, absorbed bhavita in Krishna bhakti rasa, in Krishna consciousness. In other words, that's Krishna consciousness of Krishna. So, Krishna Bhagavad Kriyatam, if you can buy it somewhere, you should buy it. Kriya yadikatopi labhyate. But what's the price? Laulyam. That's another word for greed. You have to be greedy, very, very desirous, Prabhupada would say, of this goal. How do you get that? How can you get that? By association with devotees, by practice, by going up that ladder from Shraddha to Prema that Rupa Goswami outlines. It's such a wonderful outline of the whole process. Adau Shraddha. Tatak saru sangha tapajana kriya tato nata debitisa tato nishta ruchistata. Tata sakti, tata bhava, tata prema vidanchati sadhakanam ayam premna prado bhave krama. Krama means step by step. So it begins with some faith. This isn't pure faith. This isn't the faith that Lord Chaitanya defines through Sanatana Goswami, which I'll explain in a minute. But Prabhupada said this is preliminary respect and some interest, enough to bring you into association with devotees. Now, in the modern age, with all the media beginning with books, which Bhaktisiddhanta saw as a great agent for spreading, he really pushed book distribution, and Prabhupada picked up on it. It means somehow or other pressing the right buttons or opening the pages so that you come in touch with the words of a pure devotee. The most important way of association is through the words. Now, how you receive those words, that's all important. If you're really interested and it's fascinating to you, that shows probably from previous life. You're suddenly picking up. I mean, the devotees who couldn't stop, like Vijay, he got the book, he couldn't stop reading it. He read it all in 3 days, the Bhagavad-gītā, unabridged. Yeah, it's a lot of reading, 12 hours a day. That's how much. Keshava Bharati Maharaj was the same way. When he got that, and then after he finished reading, he joined. Obviously, some previous life. I can't say that happened to me. The first book I bought was the Krishna book. I was coming from a place, association with the Ramakrishna mission and the impersonalist. It was too much. It was too much lila yet for me. But when I got to the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, I was very philosophically inclined. I said, "Oh, this is nectar. This is it." And that brought me, back to the temple again and again. So the idea is that preliminary interest, in order to get association of devotees, I mean, this kind of association, person to person, is the best, provided the proper words are being spoken, then you're receiving them with the proper receptive. What is it? Submissive or reception. So that's the shraddha, the preliminary interest and respect. Adav shraddha, the sadhu sangha. Then the sadhu sangha takes place. There's so many. There's a whole ashtaka by Kapila Muni, his mother, right at the beginning of his teaching, glorifying sadhu sangha. You heard it before. I don't know if you heard it. So it starts out, prasanga majaram pashamatma kavayo vadusa he sadhashikato mokshadvaram apavatam. Those, ordinary conditioned souls who are very strongly attached to material life. It's like ropes in the heart, knots in the heart. Prasanga means very strongly attached. This prefix pra is always an intensifier. It means very. And sangha, it means attached. So prasangam ajaram pasham, very strong pasha, that's ropes. Atmana kaviyo vidu, the kavis, the wise people, know that the soul that's in that condition, that same attachment has to be redirected to the sadhus, the persons who are realized. Saesha sadhu shukrito moksha dwaram apavatam. That opens the door of liberation. We've heard this analogy before. It opens the door to liberation. So I made that one into a poem. Mundane affection keeps us tied to birth and death infernal, but love for sadhus opens wide the doors to life eternal. You can take it. You can give it. Publish it. I don't care. So then the next question is, well, who's the sadhu? Okay, I want to associate with sadhus. Who's the sadhu? So we give 3 verses describing the character and the activities of the sadhu. The first is a very famous verse: Tatikshava karunika suridak sarvadehinam ajata shatra vakshanta sadhavak sadhabhushana. Now, interesting enough, in this verse, he doesn't mention bhakti yoga. Doesn't mention Krishna. Just the external characteristics of the sadhu by which you can recognize him. So Tatikshava means very tolerant. Tatikshava, karuna, but very merciful. Now it's interesting he mentions those two in conjunction, because that's where you really see the tolerance of a sadhu, when he goes out to try to help others out of mercy, ready to tolerate. Prabhupada would always give the example of Jesus Christ. He's ready to risk his life and lose his life, but keep preaching. So out of mercy he's preaching, and has to be tolerant to all the opposition and attacks. And Suridak Sarvadehinam, the friend of all embodied living entities. And Prabhupada makes a point, Notice it doesn't say just human beings, and even cows, and all animals, everyone, insects, Oh, boo-boo, watch out, And we get a little tissue, try to pick up the little insect, throw them out, I'm sorry? Put the cup down and then try to chop them. Don't hurt them. Bring that thing together. Where are you going to find that anywhere? So that's Sarvadayinam. Ajata Shatravat means that this is the old thing of the enemy not born, not having any enemies, which doesn't kind of work until you explain it, because enemy in English means you have enemies or you have, it works both ways. Because it's understood, well, if someone is your enemy, you'll be his enemy. But that doesn't work in transcendental life. They may see you as an enemy, but you don't see anyone as an enemy. So ajata shanta bhakshana, having no enmity toward anyone, and shanta, therefore, being very peaceful. Not desiring, that's understood, not desiring anything material, because you're always absorbed in trying to save the fallen souls, and not bearing any enmity even for those who attack you. This is perfectly shown with Prahlad Maharaj. Sadhavak sadhabhushana, these are the ornaments of a sadhu. So then the question, how does one get those qualities? Then he describes bhakti, of course. Maya ananyena bhavein, Maya means unto me, this is Kapila Dev, the incarnation of Krishna speaking. Maya ananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti yed vidham. Matkrute chakta karmanas chakta swajana bandhava. Which means, the central characteristic of a sadhu is that he has one-pointed, unflinching devotion to Krishna. To me, says Kapila Deva, incarnation. Bhaktim kurvanti yed vidham, very firmly determined. And the evidence is, matkrate tyakta karmanas, for my sake, you'll give up any activity. And this indicates renunciation, detachment from the people and things and everything which are impediments to your devotion. And therefore he says, Matkrate chakta karma chakta swajana bandhava, even if they're impediments, is friends and relatives. He'll separate himself from friends and relatives because they can be a big impediment. So what does he do, such a sadhu? Marashya katam nishta shinvanti katayanti cha. Tapanti vividastapa naitan mankata chetasa. Always hearing my sweet glories, marashya. This indicates two things. It can be someone who's taken shelter of me, or it can be vibrations which are related to me. My ananyena bhavena marashya kata mrishta. So shinvanti katya, the hearing and chanting the glory by glories which are so attractive. And because of that, he says, such a sadhu does not suffer the same kind of pains that an ordinary person does, because his mind is so absorbed in me that he knows he's not the body. So even though he may get ill or this or that, he doesn't take it in the same way that an ordinary person does. His mind is absorbed in me. Believe it or not, I like to listen to Prabhupada's explanation. He gave talks on all these verses, and he gives an example that no one would ever imagine he would give, of Joseph Stalin, believe it or not. Did you heard this lecture?
No, I think you mentioned it.
Oh, you mentioned it, yeah.
But it was like a year ago.
Yeah. So I know that Joseph Stalin was completely paranoid. He was such a demon that he was afraid that people would assassinate him. So that's the context. So he had to have an operation. He had some disease on his stomach. So he went for the operation, and the doctor offered to give him what did Prabhupada call it? Not chloroform. I think chloroform. Anesthesia. And he said, no worry. He was afraid of getting assassinated. Put him under and said, "Okay, guys, come on in." He's such a demon. So he says, "Okay, we're good." So he. And he gave an example that's just possible. So, he did it. I don't know how he did it, but the idea is you put your mind somewhere else. I had a little experience of this when I first had this tooth filled. The dentist asked me, "Do you want the Novocaine or whatever they call it?" I said, "No, that's okay." So. It wasn't really that painful. There were little twinges, and I was just chanting in my mind, But when he came out, he said, "That's amazing." You know, anyone else would have said, "Yeah, fill me with Novocation." But now it's kind of hurting all the time. I got to go back and get a root canal or something. Anyway, so it's possible. You know, even in the heat of battle or in a football field or something, you may be injured. You know, you not even realize it. It's not a serious injury, and then later on, you say, "Oh my God, it looks like I sprained my ankle or something." So the point is where the mind is. If the mind can be withdrawn from the body and, you know, placed on Krishna, you can become so tolerant. That's the idea. So then he encourages his mother. He has a intermediate verse here. So Esha sadhavak sadvi sarva dosha harahite. No, sarva sangha vivarjita tarete sadhavak sadvi sangha dosha harahite. You should search out such sadhus and serve them, because their association will purify you of all the bad effects of previous bad association. Sangha dosha harahite. Now when I heard that, when I saw that verse, I said, oh, that reminds me of a verse in the 15th chapter, where Krishna is describing the process of surrender at the beginning of the chapter. First he talks about the upside down banyan tree. You know, this whole world, this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So the highest there is the lowest here. You know, Krishna's conjugal affairs with the gopis. It looks like illicit sex, but it's the highest thing, but down here it is the lowest thing. So this verse describes, you know, when you understand the banyan tree, and that the source of it is Krishna, then it says, Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha. Adhyatma nitya vinabhitta kama dvandvava mukta sukatuk sangha ganta jamuda padamabhiyang tat. I don't know if I go through the whole verse. But the nirmana moha, being free of false pride, that's the first thing. Jita sangha dosha, having conquered all the evils of bad association. Sangha dosha. By associating with non-devotees or associated with anything in the modes of nature, and then there's a certain effect. You become affected by that, and that's a dosha. That's a fault. That's something you have to clear up. So this is sangha dosha, and so nirmana moha jita sangha dosha adhyatma nitya vinabhitta kama. And so then he describes being free of all material desires and so forth. I won't go through the whole verse. So then comes the key verse, like the shining jewel amongst these 8 verses. They're all great. But this one is really, really famous. Satam prasangan mama virya samvido bhavanti ritkana rasaya nakata tajoshanada shabavarga vartmani shadharati bhaktadanu kramishyati. You know that one? Have you heard that? Very important. So satam prasangan, association with satam, which is another word for sadhus, the sat. Satam prasangan, this is Kapila Dev speaking, as the incarnation of Krishna. Mama virya samvido. You will hear conversation talks about my powerful activities, my glorious activities. Mama virya samvido, Kapila Dev, Lord Kapila Dev. Samvade bhavanti ritkarna rasayana katha. This katha, these talks, these sound vibrations are just like a life-giving elixir coming to your ears. They're sweet, they're enjoyable to hear, and they're liberating you from birth and death. You know, this is it. So this is a process of yoga. This is sitting and hearing like that. What we're doing now. I'm just trying to convey Bhagavad-gītā. Satam bhavanti rit karna, the heart and the ear, it's like pure nectar. Bhavanti rasayana katha, tad applying this process, ashu apavarga vartmani, one will quickly, this process, path of liberation, apavarga vartmani. I'm going to go through this whole, apavarga means liberation. Vartmani is path. What will be the result? Shraddha, ratir, bhaktir, anukramisthiti. Step by step, we will develop stronger and stronger faith, rati, attraction for Krishna, and finally bhakti, which here means pure devotional service to me. It's a complete process, just hearing. Now, who performed the process? Who's the ideal for hearing and achieving perfection? I'll give you a hint. In only 7 days? Yeah, Parikit. He's the exemplar for each one of the processes has an exemplar, and chanting is Shukadev. So Anyway, I won't go through all 9 of them. But they provide great examples for that. So that's the idea. Then the last 2 verses, I won't go through it. It describes that the result is you develop more and more detachment from Maya, more and more attachment to Krishna. And finally, you achieve my association. He said, Mat pradigat atmani yahavarunde. And then, you go back to Godhead. So the key was, getting association of the pure devotee and taking advantage of that association. For us, that means a lot of it means like really, hearing the books and repeating them and trying to put them in practice in our lives. And association with devotees, as much as possible. So the process is still the same, and this is what the Abhyasa Yoga consists of, mostly. Okay, should we go on, or should I have any questions, comments? Okay, let's go on. So now, if you can't do that, then he gives Abhyase Pyasamarto Si Mat Karma Padamo Bhava Madartam api karmani Kurvan siddhim avapsasi. If you cannot practice the regulations of Bhakti Yoga, then just try to work for me, because by working for me, you will come to the perfect stage. Purport: one who is not able even to practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga under the guidance of a spiritual master can still be drawn to this perfectional stage by working for the Supreme Lord. How to do this work has already been explained in the 55th verse of the 11th chapter. Remember, that's the verse where Krishna says it's the essence of the whole Gita. We'll refer to that verse in a minute. One should be sympathetic to the propagation of Krishna consciousness. There are many devotees who are engaged in the propagation of Krishna consciousness, and they require help. So even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, he can try to help such work. Every endeavor requires land, capital, organization, and labor. Just as in business, one requires a place to stay, some capital to use, some labor, and some organization to expand, so the same is required in the service of Krishna. The only difference is that in materialism one works for sense gratification. The same work, however, can be performed for the satisfaction of Krishna, and that is spiritual activity. If one has sufficient money, he can help in building an office or temple for propagating Krishna consciousness, or he can help with publications. There are various fields of activity, and one should be interested in such activities. If one cannot sacrifice the results of his activities, the same person can still sacrifice some percentage to propagate Krishna consciousness. This voluntary service to the cause of Krishna consciousness will help one to rise to a higher state of love for God, whereupon one becomes perfect. I remember, this reminds me, when I lived in the temple on 55th Street in Manhattan, back in 79 and 80, and I think 81 partially. This is the I don't know if you've ever read the Lilamrita. It was this famous temple, 11-story building in Manhattan. I mean, Prabhupada loved it, Unfortunately, we couldn't afford to maintain it. I had to sell it. That's another story. So there was a devotee there. His name was Kapindra Das. And I knew him in Brooklyn Temple, and then when I came back to New York, he was there, and he was running the store. He was in charge of the store. So people would come into the store all the time. There were books there. They had a little refrigerator where I remember I had a little money my parents gave me, and I would buy kefir there, and I would have a special kefir. I don't know if you know what kefir is. It's a nice milk preparation, kind of like yogurt. So I would go in there, and I learned his technique. He would, people would come in and they would be curious, what are you all about? He was some of the first devotees that you would see would be the person who runs the store. And he would come to this purport right here. And he'd say, you may not want to take up Krishna consciousness, but Prabhupada is explaining how we need land, organization, and if you can give a donation, we can do more, we can print more books and so forth. And this way he would get sometimes some significant donations. So it's a way of preaching. But this is, if you recall, way back in the 3rd chapter, we had the chapter called Karma Yoga. And the idea is that's about giving the fruits of your activities for Krishna. In other words, not all of them, but a percentage that you can spare. And it's very important because you're getting Krishna's mercy by doing that. That money, like, forgive me, I forget this example. See that penny? I found that penny. I pick up pennies on the ground. Nobody else does.
Sorry, I do.
You do too. Do you put them in the handi? Yeah. So someone dropped that penny. This is attached to a person. They didn't think it was significant enough to borrow. They didn't even know they dropped it. But it's their penny. And if that goes in that box, that's the beginning of their devotional service. It may be a little insignificant, but it's something, you see. So similarly, if someone consciously gives, that's even, of course, much better. And that's what karma yoga is about. You can't get full-time, you have a family, whatever, you have a job. Okay, but you're sympathetic, you see the value, maybe reading Bhagavad-gītā, chanting a couple of rounds a day, whatever it is. So that therefore you give a donation when holidays come around, or there's we need a new roof or whatever, There's a lot of Indian devotees who do that. They have household jobs, everything. But they're supporting the temple. So this is kind of karma yoga. And at the same time, of course, many of them chant, and it's a spectrum. But here, if you cannot practice bhakti yoga, or you can practice but not really strictly full time, then you can still, progress. Just try to work for me. Yat karoshi yadashnasi in the 9th chapter. Whatever you do, this is a higher level. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you do it as an offering to me. But this is do a percentage. The percentage of what you do it. So you come one day a week, you come Saturday and clean up the temple and do something, And then you go home and you have to do your job. So this kind of idea of working for Krishna, it's very significant because normally people, when they work, they have some selfish motive involved. I'm going to make the money or whatever, Or even if it's just, for the family, it's still self-centered. But this is for, for Krishna, and therefore it's for everybody. When you serve Krishna, you're serving everybody. Because you become purified, the atmosphere becomes purified, it's very auspicious. Krishna becomes pleased and all kinds of things. It's good. So he's going down the list now. And and after this he said, well, you may not be able to do that either, so you'll see. Okay, we have time for one more. Ataitarapi shaktosi kartum mad yogamashitaha sarvakarma palatyagam tata kuryatatpavan. If, however, you are unable to work in this consciousness of me, then try to act giving up all results of your work and try to be self-situated. So this is like a really wide net, Purport: it may be that one is unable even to sympathize with the activities of Krishna consciousness because of social, familial, or religious considerations, or because of some other impediments. If one attaches himself directly to the activities of Krishna consciousness, there may be objections from family members or so many other difficulties. For one who has such a problem, it is advised that he sacrifice the accumulated result of his activities to some good cause. Such procedures are described in the Vedic rules. There are many descriptions of sacrifices and special functions for the full moon day, and there is special work in which the result of one's previous action may be applied. Thus one may gradually become elevated to the state of knowledge. It is also found that when one who is not even interested in the activities of Krishna consciousness gives charity to some hospital or some other social institution, he gives up the hard-earned results of his activities. That is also recommended here because, by the practice of giving up the fruits of one's activities, one is sure to purify his mind gradually, and in that purified stage of mind, one becomes able to understand Krishna consciousness. Of course, Krishna consciousness is not dependent on any other experience, because Krishna consciousness itself can purify one's mind. But if there are impediments to accepting Krishna consciousness, one may try to give up the results of his actions. In that respect, social service, community service, national service, sacrifice for one's country, etc., may be accepted so that someday one may come to the stage of pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad-gītā 18:46, we find it is stated, Yatak pavitya bhutanam. If one decides to sacrifice for the supreme cause, even if he does not know that the supreme cause is Krishna, he will come gradually to understand that Krishna is the supreme cause by the sacrificial method. So this is a little vignette, and I'm not 100% sure of all the details, but I'm pretty sure this is quite accurate. Sariputta Prabhu, who was a great favorite of Bhadrinarayan Swami, he lived here for some years. He and Druta Karma lived right down the block here in an apartment. And they put together that main book of the BI, Bhaktivedanta Institute, which is Forbidden Archaeology. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it's quite a book. And so Sariputta Prabhu, he was a high-powered mathematician. I mean, he was well-versed and a professor, and he had PhD in one field of mathematics, I guess. I forget exactly what it was. But what I remember vaguely is that he was going to a college upstate in upstate New York, and there was a flood, and there was a need for everyone get on board and to put the sandbags here and everything, and it was just a community effort to respond, as often happens if there's a disaster. You can see. So he did that. And then the way he related it, he was somewhat interested, in philosophy and things like that. And then he after that he was in a bookstore and he saw the Bhagavad-gītā. And although he had never been interested in that before, because of his purification, following this verse even inadvertently, he was open to it. He opened the book, read it, became interested, and came down to New York to see the devotees, the New York City, actually the Brooklyn Temple. And I don't think he joined up right away, but he started visiting. Haribol, and he got interested and he eventually became Sariputta. I remember when he joined, it was known that he had a degree in math, so they put a little bit, his service would go to the office and do the accounts, Oh, math? Okay, he must be good at arithmetic. Yeah. They didn't realize. He wrote a book called Proof by Information Theory that Life Cannot Come from Matter. I think I may have that book. It was a small book. It was the first thing he wrote. Oh, yeah. Have you ever seen, these high-powered mathematicians? In fact, the whole page is full of equations. You really can't understand what's going on, But he assured us this was a proof. There's so much information in the universe. There's a way of calculating, the differentiation, that it couldn't possibly have come about by chance. There must be an intelligence that put it together, which is basically the argument from design by Thomas Aquinas that Prabhupada used all the time. Right? And then he wrote other things like this other book and this Vedic cosmography is another one, based on the fifth canto. Very interesting. When I came here, there wasn't any work for me to do for the BBT right away, but there was that Vedic cosmography book that needed to be worked on. And so I got my first little, some of you may know the history, this little stand-up one-piece Mac computer with the built-in screen. You know that one. It's a museum piece now. So that was my computer. I was working on that layout and everything. I would help put that book out. But it was so he had a wonderful career, And so that exactly confirmed this purport, that if you simply are helping others and you're doing that in the mode of goodness, then you're more open to also understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Krishna sees that and he gives you a chance. So that's what he's saying here. At least try to be generous. And that'll hopefully at a certain point you'll be generous to a devotee and take a book. Something like that. That's practically what happens. All right. So this is a good place to stop. We'll begin in Monday on text 12, and then we're moving to a little different section of the chapter, which only has 20 verses, and after this, and then he has a whole list of wonderful qualities that we're supposed to try to develop. And I have time for one little poem. Yes, exactly. I quoted the wrong poem that Bhadrinarayan liked. This is what he really likes. So it's based on a verse that was uttered by Haridas Thakur about the holy name, which goes, I say anghak, but our friend Moga would say amhak samharam, but I'm not going to do that. Anghak sanghadatakidam sakadudihade vasakadadokasya tadanitipatamanajaladinjayajitagammangalang hare nama. And the meaning is as follows. This is the Haridas Thakur's definition of the verse, or the translation, and its purport. When the moon is invisible, withered to nil, and the sun is long gone from the sky, then an ocean of darkness envelops this world, and the timorous fear they might die. But that thick pall of gloom is at once swept away when the first signs of sunrise appear, and the dawning of day gives assurance to all that in truth there is nothing to fear. In a similar way, when illusion holds sway, and the soul has forgotten his Lord, then the darkness of ignorance covers his heart. Sin and suffering are his reward. But as soon as he says Krishna's name even once, in a manner that doesn't offend, then his ignorance flees like the darkness at dawn, and his sin and his suffering end. So there's nothing to fear, for the sun of the name has appeared with his powers divine. In your heart may that sun, benedictive for all, become fixed and eternally shine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Oh, now I remember the verse I forgot. Atakshi Krishna namadi namabe graya mindriyai sevan mukha hijivado swayaveva sparatpada. There's no time to. On Monday, I'll tell you what it means. Okay. Hare Krishna.